what I really believe for every person, especially the more experienced you are, is that what got you here is not going to take you to the next step. What's powerful, I think, about the agility quotient is that it's not stagnant. Your IQ stays the same, but that's not the same for your AQ. If you intentionally work on it, you can get your AQ up to a point where it's really serving you.
Welcome to Unstoppable Brain. I'm Dr. Kyra, and we're here to translate neuroscience into behavior change and the life you want. Today, we welcome Liz Tran, executive coach to some of the world's fastest growing CEOs, former tech executive, and author of a new book, AQ, a new kind of intelligence for a world that's always changing. Our conversation is the most vital skill set that you can possibly have right now: agility. She unpacks a really great toolkit of how to think about agility, the skills you need to focus on, and really makes it simple as well as actionable. So I'm really excited about this conversation because in this rapid changing world, we need new tools to be able to figure out how to address what otherwise could be very terrifying levels of change. Hi, Liz. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Dr. Kyra.
Your message is maybe the most important message of our time. I think that, I saw a talk that you did where you said, change is not just linear right now, it's exponential. And I feel like this conversation is survival. This conversation is existential. And I don't mean that with any sort of, fear attached to it. It's more hope, and also wisdom. And so I really wanted to kind of unpack your point of view. I find your work to be really poignant, really instructive. And yeah, just tell me how you got here. Like not everybody is willing to embrace change. In fact, many of us hesitate and try everything except going to that place. And, I'd really, let's start off with how you became converted to being so flexible, being so agile, being so embracing of change.
The original genesis of how important agility is for us came in a pretty almost like a theoretical sense before I started applying it to life. I was working as an executive at a top venture capital firm, and one of the questions we had is, what do all of our successful founders have in common? And this was almost 10 years ago. So pre all of this exponential change that we've all been experiencing since 2020. So I interviewed about 4 dozen founders who had either had successful exits or IPOs who we had invested in. And the goal was to get to, I don't know, 5 to 7 characteristics that they all had in common that we could use to select future founders. So the idea was, okay, we're going to crack the code on what a successful founder is. And after about 2 years of work where I gave personality assessments to this group of quote unquote, the upper echelon of founders, had long conversations and interviews with them about where they're from, their childhoods, their pedagogy, what their interests were, et cetera. At the end of the day, I only found that they had one thing in common, and that was agility. It was that they were constantly reinventing themselves. And that's why it was hard to pin down, a set of 5 to 7 characteristics because they were never the same.
Mm.
These people were always changing. And also when change happened to them, they were more amenable to it. They could handle it with a sort of graciousness and even excitement that eluded most people. And so I sort of put this to the side because I thought this is just relegated to founders who, by nature, are just experiencing a lot of change in their day to day. If they're tech founders, everything's always shifting for them. But then we all felt ourselves thrust into a level of change, uncertainty that we had never experienced before with the pandemic.
Mm.
And even in our post-pandemic world, we still feel it. That was just our let's say the opening act to what we're experiencing now. And part of that is geopolitical, part of that is technology based and AI. Um, but what has been really clear to me is that IQ, which is really a relic of 130 years ago, and even EQ, which became popularized 35 years ago, while they are important, they are really insufficient to explain what it is that separates the people who are completely undone by the future and they just really feel like they can't get their footing underneath them versus the people who figure out a way to, not only survive, but also thrive and find happiness in this new paradigm.
So you came into this project, it sounds like, with a hypothesis, if I could name it that way. You think there was a group of characteristics that were grouping towards the top of your top performers within the stable of entrepreneurs and people who were building successful businesses. And it was surprising, I hear, that it was more one quality, if you will, the agility quality. How did that sound in the research? How did you pick that out? Because I would imagine as somebody doing research, expecting 5 or 6 different, answers to the test, to be able to find one and to, really discipline yourself to hearing that over and over again and not trying to, have the 5, be the answer. How did you yourself flex to what the truth was coming out as, this one quality?
Yeah, and I think it had a profound impact on even how I view myself, because if you had had me guess what those set of qualities would be, I went into the project feeling very confident that I already knew, and I was looking for data just to back that up. So I would have said, someone who's ambitious, someone who has a little bit of a chip on their shoulder, something to prove, right? Because um, especially for a founder, there are a lot of other easier ways to find your career path than that path, and so, there's almost this feeling of, like an underdog mentality of, like, really needing to show the world what your gifts and talents are. I don't even know what the word would be, but that feeling of it. Um,
Unresolved childhood pain?
Probably. Some sort of,
I mean, that's
yeah.
real because if you look at the stories of the sort of tech oligarchs right now, there's a common history of being bullied, being,
Mhm.
president of the chess club, like not being, um, you know, attractive to women or, whatever the case may be. So there is kind of like an angsty, somewhat cringy in a way sometimes to this, those that are the tech bros that are running the world, I'll say, that they have in common, kind of this chip on the shoulder. So I think that's a very valid question, that we need to ask ourselves in terms of, if we unpack success, how much of it is this unresolved childhood pain that is driving certain people? And we can get into that with, how that marries or maybe synergizes with agility as you will, and yeah, please continue.
Yes, and, recently there was a venture capital fund that faced some scrutiny when they came out, and they said that something that they look for in their founders is trauma, childhood trauma,
Are you
and
kidding? Are you
no,
kidding?
and,
Whoa, that's
a lot of
dark.
people were like, "This is," "this feels exploitative, this is not the right way to phrase it," but I was
Heck
also
yeah.
thinking that it's not untrue. I mean, even personally, like, I come from a place, I grew up with a single mom, we lived in Section 8 housing, and I always felt this myself, that I did feel like there was something inordinate within me that I felt like I had to prove. Um, but yeah, I think it's interesting because as I worked on this project, I thought I knew it was probably the 3rd thing I would say is maybe, some sort of almost delusional sense of optimism or confidence in a way, just believing that, there's greater possibility in the world. And what I found is that even the first one, ambition, which feels like it's it's pretty inarguable that people would think, "Oh, of course, founders are all ambitious." That's not true. It wasn't actually coming up in the personality assessments. There were
Hmm.
some people who were doing it because they did crave power, money, status, whatever it was, but there are other people who just they were very oriented towards something else. It could be, mission orientation, belonging, helping others, altruism. So it just really depended on the person. And I gave this personality assessment. I sort of put the project away because I couldn't find anything. I gave the personality assessment again. And what I noticed is that people changed significantly. And
Mm.
then in 2019, I decided to leave that venture fund and start off with my own coaching practice. And that's when I really started experimenting, because I coach almost definitively, like, with no exceptions, CEOs of fast-growing tech companies, and I was able to then have them as, a sample set. And often, and this is very different than most coaches, but I coach my clients for years. Most of them I've been seeing for 4 or 5 years straight. And so I've really seen that evolution. And so I started tracking that then of like how different this person was when I first met them to who they are now. Um, and I started noticing that on this personality assessment, they would change, we would become 7x more motivated by recognition, 10x more motivated by commerce, which is, financial gain, um, 3 times more mischievous, or 3 times more mischievous. And it was pretty striking to me. And that's when I thought, okay, um, this is why we can't land on a set of attributes, is because that set of attributes is always changing.
So you're saying that as you coach people, or even as you revisit people at different time points, that you're seeing them change, and that was the clue that this agility was happening, or this adaptability was happening in between. And you're even seeing that in your own coaching clients. It doesn't surprise me that people want to stick with you long term, because I think that what you're offering in terms of helping somebody navigate change is the most fundamental need, unmet need of leaders, successful people, people living their lives. Who wouldn't want that? I mean, I think we're kind of evolving past the, shall I say, overly fixated childhood narrative in therapy. And, you certainly have to unpack that. You can't go on at some point without that, getting in your way, right? But being stuck there, I think we've seen enough therapizing of society right now where some people can get stuck there, and what's fresh is, get me out of this, help me to evolve and adapt to the world that is happening right now. And that's, very, very valuable, especially for executives, leaders, successful people, people who are, really interested and passionate, like you said, driven by something, even if it's a different thing from everybody else.
Yes, and there's something called the end of history illusion, which is
Mm.
the false assumption that we have become the most complete version of ourselves that we will ever be. And really successful, accomplished people are especially susceptible to that belief because they've worked so hard to get where they are. And they've, in many ways received kind of that end of the finish line spoils that you get, those rewards. And so they think, yeah, I'm here, I made it. But what I have come to find that actually the more experienced, the more senior, the more worldly and, wise you are, the more you actually need to adopt beginner's mind, which is,
Mm.
the Buddhist way of describing coming into every situation with, a fresh, novice perspective to ask questions, to assume that you don't know. And that's a big part of where we are today in the world, where wisdom is of course important, but equally important to your agility is the process of unlearning.
Mhm.
And what I really believe for every person, especially the more experienced you are, is that what got you here is not going to take you to the next step. And we're used to thinking of being intelligent as the quality of addition. So adding more knowledge, broadening your network, um, creating more impact in the world. Um, but there's a equally important measure, which is to remove those innate beliefs or those assumptions that you've held for a long time. Remove, the way that you think of yourself and the qualities that you think are you're in your zone of genius, and to realize that we are growing and changing just as much in our 70s and 80s as we are in our 20s. Research has actually shown that, if you let yourself do that. And what's powerful, I think, about the agility quotient is that it's not stagnant. IQ actually holds pretty stagnant over the course of a lifetime, barring any sort of traumatic events. Your IQ stays the same, but that's not the same for your AQ. You can you can sort of, if you intentionally work on it, you can get your AQ up to a point where it's really serving you.
I'm gonna throw a ball in the center of our conversation here that I do not expect you to know. But I think that, given how adept you are at all of this, I think that this is something that I want to kind of put as clay for us to kind of, work with here for our listeners, our audience. And it is that there is an area in the brain called the habenula. And basically, this area is, in Buddhist terms, the neural center of aversion. It's where we
Oh.
like know, it's the brakes on our behavior. It controls dopamine, it controls serotonin, it controls our mood, it controls and drives negative self-talk, and then also when it's on and it's negatively talking to ourselves, it also, drives addiction, both cravings and withdrawal symptoms. So I'll load that up for you right quick. And there was a paper recently, because this podcast is called Unstoppable Brain. I'm just going to talk about the brain science of it a second. That showed that in animals, that unless you have this part of the brain activate when something's not working. Let's say plan A isn't working. I'm failing, like this isn't working out for me. And this is the aversion that comes in like, hey, this isn't working out for you. Better stop, this is the brake pedal. If your brakes are broken, like they blocked the habenula in this case, then the animal will keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results, right? And they will not adapt a plan B, a plan C, a plan D. Like they don't embrace change. And so to me, that's super fascinating that, kind of we've found the locus, if you will, or the central part of the brain that is kind of the switch, if you will, from doing something that you used to do the old way and allowing us to be averse to that so that we can adopt something new. And I'm curious whether you see that in your coaching practice, and how you assist people in making that switch when the time is right. Like, how do you help them to, you have these ABCDs that you go over in your talk, your book, and maybe that's a tool, but maybe there's something else too. So please lead us through that.
Absolutely. Um, I did not know about that part of the brain, but
No
what it
one
makes
does. No one
me
does. Do not, yeah, it's probably like 0.1% of the population on the planet, I think, has heard of this. So, you're in good company now.
Great, and it reminds me of, some research I was doing for my book on animals, um, and what I learned is that there are, different penguins that are faring better than others, and the ones that are faring better are the ones who have actually decided to move their nests into different locations southward, as the climate is changing around them, and those
Wow.
are the ones that are actually, growing and thriving. But then there are other penguins, like the chinstrap penguins that, um, even though, they feel the changes, they just keep doing the same thing. They mate in the same areas, they nest in the same areas, and they just cannot stop doing it even though their numbers are dwindling, and they feel that every year.
Mm.
So, when I think about my clients who I help, these CEOs, I feel like the way that I do that is to help them feel that pain, to basically say, "Okay, let's notice what is happening here. Why do we keep running ourselves into the same, question, the same problem over and over and over again?" And that's actually the only time I ever get, quote, unquote, "frustrated" with my clients
Mm.
is, I'll stop them and I'll say, "How many times have we talked about that?" And I'll actually start to take note where I'm like, "We've dedicated 12 of our sessions to this. How much money is that costing you? How much time is this costing you?" So part of that is I maybe, if that part of the brain isn't working, maybe I function externally as that to say, there's some pain here. But then the second thing it could be is that I truly believe that agility requires stability. So even though we need to change and we need to modify what we've been doing, there needs to be some piece of land that we can hold on to, a security blanket to help us feel safe and comfortable so that we can then take those risks. And so perhaps what it is that my client is missing some anchor. That's the A of the ABCs of agility.
Mm.
And an anchor is anything, person, place, or routine that provides grounding. Because we need that to take risks. They are two sides of the same coin. And so then I ask them, like, Walk me through your typical day. What does this look like? Who is in your community? Who are you turning to right now? What are your habits? Do you exercise? Do you journal?" And if I'm finding that there's not much to hold on to, it makes sense that they're stuck in a rut at work because they don't really have anything to depend on. So the thought of adding even more volatility is terrifying for them.
So, yeah, like let's go there real quick because I think a lot of people feel under-resourced. I was just having a conversation with my daughter last night about this. Like she's hitting her, let's call it a Saturn return, where you're kind of
Mhm.
individual thing from your parents. You're looking at how disappointing they were for you. And she's really like she doesn't want to be angry at me, but I'm like, just be angry at me. I didn't do everything right. She's like, well, you kind of made me feel like I had to be quiet all the time because you were on the phone because I had a big corporate job, kind of in that zone of her teenage years. And she took that as just be quiet, don't share who you are, don't, use your voice. And so now all that anger stewing up and that kind of thing. And she doesn't have, besides me, she's got friends and she's in a new city. She's working as a lawyer in DC, and there's work friends, but they're not like deep. And then she's got her therapist going out on maternity leave, and so I was just pointing out like you need resources to be able to hold you during this time. And I look at your ecosystem and it looks pretty thin. And so,
Mhm.
what is it that you find is most common for when somebody anchors themselves? What do they do differently, or is it different for each person, in your opinion?
I think it's different for each person, but the three main categories that um, people generally turn to are the first is people, and that's friends, family, even a mentor, a community. When I was in my 20s, I had my first marriage. I was married, and by the time I was 30, I was divorced, which was
Me
really
too.
early for. Okay, right, good to know.
31. You beat
31.
me.
And that was a time when my friends were just starting to get married, so I felt really isolated because I had already been married and I was already coming out the other end, and they were so full of optimism and excitement, and that's when I became a Buddhist because
Mm.
the people who had been my rocks, we just weren't on the same page anymore, and I remember going to, a Buddhist satsang, like a community gathering on a Friday night, and the person leading it saying, "If you're here in New York City on a Friday night, chances are you really need this." And I thought to myself, "Yeah, I really need this." And so meditation became my thing. But for a lot of my clients, sometimes it's exercise. I have one who the more stressed he becomes, the longer bike rides he goes on. He'll go on a 3-hour bike ride. And then
Yeah.
he also taught himself how to play the piano during one of the most stressful moments of his career when he thought his company was gonna go under, and people said to him, like, "How are you picking up a new hobby during this?" And I just thought, "It's not a hobby. This he needs this. This is a resource. He's hanging on to this for dear life because there's something so beautiful and predictable, but, if you spend 30 minutes practicing a piece, you're guaranteed that you'll be better at it." There are very few things in life that offer us that sort of stable, result that we can predict with that certainty. And so I think for everyone it's different, and what I would recommend is that you look outside of the box of what you normally do if it feels like you're not getting enough from your existing people, places, and routines. And this might be a chance to broaden outward. Or what I might say is, are you the one who is intentionally holding yourself back from these things? Because I do believe that when we're under stress and we really feel the fire under our feet, we tend to let go of these anchors. We already have them, but then we stop calling our friends. We don't call our family. We stop exercising. We
Right.
don't make that cup of tea in the morning and just sit there for 15 minutes looking out the window because we think that we're too busy or that these things are frivolous. And so I want to underscore is that they have this innate power to them. And even if they seem simple or frivolous, they're not. These are what you're holding on to. These are your handholds when you're scaling a sheer cliff.
Can I also just introduce that as we age, because I'm, been at this a while, the needs shift or what we can do shifts, meaning that, I used to go sit in the forest every morning for an hour in this redwood circle. Amazing. And I can't figure out why I have stopped doing that, except that I started to have to get ready, like camera ready after COVID. that there became a lot more video expectations at work. Even though I did have a virtual company before that, it just was a lot more phone calls,
Yes.
and so that extra time that I need to get camera ready or make sure that I've showered or whatever, that might have been the disruptor as well. But as you're talking about it, I just longed for, "God, I want to be in the forest again. I want to go back there." But how do you help people iterate? And that's my favorite word in the world, by the way. How do you help them iterate to what's going to work for them now? Is that like a design sprint, of different ideas and them trying on different things, and kind of walking them through a patience exercise because I'm sure they're suffering and they want to like not suffer and they want to find that anchor so quickly. How does that go?
So the first thing I'll have them do is an energy audit. And I ask them to start putting everything that they do into their calendar, even if it's, let's say 30 minutes to shower and get dressed in the morning, or 15 minutes to quickly eat a piece of toast or cereal in the morning. And in addition to our normal Zoom calls and phone calls that we have throughout the day, or even deep work blocks, and at the end of every day, I ask them to color code it just to say whether it was green, which was energy producing, red, energy draining, or yellow, neutral. And we track that because I really believe that, unless we're starting the day with our gas tanks 100% full, we're going to end the day really, really depleted. So if you begin at a
Mm,
10, naturally we're going to use our reserves and end up at, 5, 6 probably by the end of the day, and you'll need to fill up again. But if you're starting at a 3, you're going to be negative by the time you even hit lunchtime. And so I use this metaphor with them where, um, we're always thinking, are you red, yellow, green? And how do you start getting green, green, green? And so it's an iterative process, but that's actually the first question I ask when I check in with a coaching client. I say, are you red, yellow, or green right now? And it actually forces them to sit and think, because I think most of the time we're so busy, we don't even ask ourselves that question. We don't ask, how full is my tank? And then we can go look back. And if they say I'm red or yellow, I'm like, let's look at your calendar. What's been happening here? What's depleting you? So I'm a big fan of not only adding things in, like, when you described sitting in a circle of redwoods, I just thought that would maybe get me to a 10 in about 5 minutes, for sure. So things like that, like, for me in the morning, I like to have a smoothie because it sort of feels like
what's in
it's
your
sitting.
smoothie? What are the
um,
ingredients?
right
This
now,
magical
I'm doing a
smoothie.
smoothie with berries, banana, some sort of nut butter, spinach, and then I also put a collagen powder in there, and so I put,
Wow.
a scoop of collagen powder and a scoop of protein, because I know I'm getting my protein for the day, but it feels kind of like a treat because it's cold and it's refreshing, and, when I was pregnant, I just, like, wanted cold, sweet things all the time, and I've just kept going with that, and it's so simple, but I really like it. It just, like, feels like a treat for me. And so it's different for everyone, but, my 2 aims are, 1, to start their day right, and to also for them to have an awareness of what is energizing them and what's depleting them, and then we try to remove as much as we can of the things that are depleting them. So, let's say they do a meeting with all of their direct reports on Tuesdays, and they leave feeling like, "Why that's the worst meeting of my life. I can't work after that." I'm like, "Okay, why? Do we need to change the structure? Do you actually have to be there?" So it's both a combination of addition and subtraction.
Wow. And so what have you found to be consistently, thematically, I guess, energy giving and energy taking? And then you also went back to the resources. You covered people, but maybe I missed the other two categories. So let's
Yes.
revisit that as well.
Yeah, so the other 2 categories of your anchors are places. So that could be your home, which is honestly really important for people.
Hmm.
And, some of my clients are, um, they came up to the path of being a founder through being an engineer or a product person, and then they're in their mid-20s or mid to late 20s, and when they are feeling really dysregulated, I ask, "What's your house like? What's your apartment like?" And some of them are like, "Oh, I haven't even decorated, I just sleep on a mattress on the floor," or, like, 3 nights a week I crash in
My
the office.
gosh.
And I just think, of course you feel dysregulated. You don't have a home. Like every animal, every creature has a home. So that's one is your places. And that can be third places. It can be the park. It could be a redwood circle. I remember when I was going through IVF, it was just a really challenging period because we were trying, failing constantly. And I felt like a failure. And at the same time, my neighborhood in New York had changed dramatically because there was suddenly a they had opened a methadone clinic on the corner, and then, there's this park, and post-pandemic, there were fewer services for people who were unhoused and had, substance abuse, challenges, and my neighborhood just became totally untenable, where I was stepping over someone who was passed out on my stoop every day to go walk my dog, and I really was craving a place anchor. So I started walking about 30 minutes to get to a park on the other side of town, and I would just sit there
Mm.
for 15 minutes. I would just zone out, and that honestly
Mhm.
recharged me. It can be the yoga studio, it can be your mom's kitchen, it can be, the local library, whatever it is, but that physical space is deeply meaningful for us. And finally, the last one is our routines. And so as we talked about before, it's anything that, is a behavior or an action that has repeatability to it. And I honestly feel that the simpler, the better. And anything can be a routine, right? It's, listening to a podcast while you brush your teeth. It's going to walk the dog. It's calling your daughter on the way home from the supermarket every day, whatever it might be. Um, and these are the set of anchors that then make it possible to do the second pillar of AQ, which is to take bets. So anchors and bets. More bets you're taking, like
So these
your
are
daughter.
skills, right? Like you describe these as skills. So one skill is an anchor, and I think that's really important to have the word skill there and why to pull that out, that I think that's really smart of you to name it a skill instead of a goal,
Yes.
because it's something that sets the mindset differently, that I'm here to see if I can do this and how far I can go, and it automatically implies that there is a continuum that I'm on, that, I'm just gonna keep working the problem, and I like that expectation because goals, to me, I have a little issue with the word goals in the way that it's being used in our current society. It creates this finite opposite of beginner's mind, this finish line, this kind of, win or lose levy. And so I just wanted to, credit you for using really skillful language there, no pun intended.
Thank you. And you're right. Um, to use the word goals wouldn't to, attach the arrival fallacy that you've made it somehow. And I do think that what we need in our anchors is always changing and it is a skill that's on a continuum. Often think about I work a lot in the corporate space and these days employees are feeling very untethered.
Yeah.
There's a rumor that Meta is gonna lay off 70% of their staff.
They're trying.
Um,
They're trying to get
yeah,
there.
they're
I'm in
really
Silicon
trying.
Valley, so you and I are, seeing 2 sides of the same coin.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
they're really trying. They're tracking everyone's keyboard strokes, mouse swipes to automate all these,
Did you
every
hear
action
about
that
the little GoPro cameras that they're putting on their heads or whatever that they're
No.
forcing? Yeah, so they're putting little cameras on the employees' heads. I feel like they're just captured. These are captured humans,
Yes.
and
Yes.
that they get to see, like, what the arms are doing so that the AI can entrain itself on human action, and
It's so
yeah, go ahead.
dehumanizing.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Because what is the implication that that's gonna go on forever? No, you are basically actively participating in your own obsolescence, and you are arming something that is dehumanizing at a level of scale that we have never seen, and so, this is why this conversation around agility is, to me, the most important skill. And so let's keep going through the skills of agility as you see them, because I think people really need to know what they can do. These things can be scary, but I don't want to spend any energy there. Talk about energy, what gives you energy. What gives me energy is, let's get the word out. Let's help people to be agile. So let's keep going. So you're saying
Yes.
bets is the second. So these are A, B, C, D, folks. In case you're counting, we're on B. So go ahead.
Yes, you're gonna be it. And a bet is any action that you take without knowing the outcome. And similar to stepping up to a roulette table and saying red, black, you don't know where the ball is going to land, but you still step up anyway. And bets can be as small as trying a new coffee shop versus the one that's in your status quo routine. Or a bet can be as large as moving to a new city where you don't have a community. But the skill, you're right, it's a skill. The skill here is to get really practice at operating in that space of not knowing, of ambiguity. I'm going to take this action, I'm going to make this move, and I don't know how it's going to land. And what I think is really important here is that we stop rewarding ourselves for outcome and success. Because if we did that, if we only took the wins as as indication that we're on the right track, then we would stop betting because we
Mhm.
would stay in the comfort zone, in the zone where we know we can succeed. And so here with bets, I recommend that people start looking at their recovery rate versus their impact rate. So how quickly, let's say you put yourself out there to have a difficult conversation with someone. Doesn't go as planned. You made a bet, didn't work out. How quickly can you let that conversation go and move on? Let's say you are learning a new skill, so you raise your hand for a new project at work, and it's not a success in the way that you think it will be. You don't dwell on it. You take the learnings and you move on and you try again. And so we start optimizing for the speed of recovery rate versus just the pure number of points on the board. And that is the biggest way to get your AQ up.
I love that. Well, for two reasons. One is that we're seeing a real anemia of bet making, especially in romantic domains.
Mhm.
There is almost like, these apps and things like that. I know many, many people, men and women, who are experiencing failure with the current dating apps. And part of that is algorithmic, that they're set up to really not give you what they know you need and they know you like and they know you want because they want to keep you failing so that
Yeah.
you keep playing the roulette game. So you are wasting your bets in a way on that mechanism that just like a casino, the house always wins, not always, but like you have to go in knowing that the likelihood that you're going to win against the house is going to be very low. And so I think people are not seeing them clearly as the casinos that they are, and then they are becoming shriveled in going up to somebody in a coffee shop being like, "Hey, I like your vibe. Hey, I like how you're doing it here." So, I really think that that's a muscle, isn't it? Like it's a muscle of both exertion and taking that chance and facing that fear, being courageous, being risk
Mhm.
taking. And
And something
then
that you're leading
yeah,
to,
go ahead.
Kara, is really important because we talk about this AI world that we're living in and how we're gonna remain, um, uh, skillful, and that those human to human interactions, those cannot be replicated, so we're becoming shriveled there, this younger generation, but that's exactly where we need to grow muscle, is
Yeah.
in going up to someone at a coffee shop, introducing yourself, creating that human to human dynamic with someone, and so I that's a huge area for betting, is can you take that risk? And not even just in romance, but in general,
Yeah.
friendships, mentorships, professional alliances.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to the habenula, if I could get back to the brain for a second, that being the predictor of failure, it's always saying, are you going to fail at this? And is it worth it? Is it worth making? And then it stops you from trying. If it
Mm,
turns on, it kills your motivation to keep trying. And so the fact that you're focusing people's attention on relapse isn't just good intuition on your part, but it is actually neuroscience that is you are combating the main obstacle in their brain, the habenula, and you're giving them a way to recover from the habenula going, "Oh my God, that's the worst thing that ever could happen to me." And you're saying, "Oh, really? No, it's just about coming back, coming back, coming back on the horse." And there's even data on people who lose weight long term Their only thing that they do differently than everybody else is they have the shortest relapse periods. That means
Mm.
they get on the horse faster than everybody else. That is it. That's the whole game. So you are spot on with that instruction, if I could call it that, to focus us on that.
I did not know that, but it makes sense to me because, the way that I always what I always say to my clients is, let's say they're trying to do a behavior or stick to some sort of habit, and they fail. I say, "It doesn't matter, it's just a slip, right? That's fine,
Hmm.
just as long as it's not 2 days in a row." If it's not 2 days in a row, then we're totally fine because the slip doesn't become a slide all the way down to the bottom.
I might
Um
suggest, like, just get out of it as soon as you can. Because if you challenge me with not 2 days in a row, I have a rebel inside of me. I don't even know where this comes from, but I will make that happen. I will subconsciously fail twice, just because you said, well, don't do it twice. And I'll be like, oh yeah, let's see what happens with, it's just like the little, I don't know, contrarian or, bad child in me, that wants to make that so and, cause more suffering for myself somehow. So I would say, just like just reduce the time. You're looking for like how quickly you can recover, how quickly you can, correct course, how quickly you can re-engage yourself. There's a planner in you, there's a doer in you. Like, can the planner grab the doer at some point? Grab their attention, reassure them, get them back in action, and you are serving that planner role in people's lives because they're outsourcing that to you because they don't feel like they can engage themselves in that way consistently enough or well enough, and so you are helping them to build that relationship with their doer.
Yes, absolutely. And what you said before about the rebel within you, I love that because the key to actually making really skillful bets is to understand your own personality and which bets are going to resonate most with you. So before we just complete with, C and D of the final skills, one direction I'll point people in is to find out what your AQ archetype is. It's really easy. You can do it at aqquiz.com and it takes 5 minutes. And I actually imagine, Kyra, that you might be the astronaut. The astronaut archetype is the one that is the innovator. We call it the astronaut because you are floating around in space, interested in what's next. What's the next frontier? Where
Yeah,
can you go that no one has been before? And that's where a little bit of that rebellion comes from because you think to yourself, no, I don't want to do it the way everyone else does it. I want to be an innovator. You're really motivated by your passions and other people might have trouble keeping up with you. They might say, "Wait, Kyra, slow down a little bit. Can you explain it to me again?" But you have such a fully fleshed out vision. And so for the astronaut, I recommend that they take bets by simply following their interest areas because those always lead them to what's on the next horizon. There
absolutely, absolutely.
Do you
So
think that sounds like
you are
you?
spot
I don't know
on.
what to take the quiz.
You are
Okay,
spot
great.
on. No, you are spot on. And I have tried to temper the, over visioning because if you have too many visions too quickly, you lose people so much. And so staying within one standard deviation, if you will, of the pack of understanding, the mass consciousness is a skill for an astronaut, to be able to stay relevant and to serve in a way that doesn't just float off into space, to your point. And so what are the other archetypes and how do they operate?
Yeah, and just to add on to what you said before I describe the other ones, that is
Hmm.
absolutely what I write in the book about how astronauts can become the most impactful versions of themselves. Because when they do that, and they stay within one standard deviation of the rest of us, then they become the most inspirational of all the archetypes because people can see the turn signals, they can see the road, otherwise the astronaut's too far down, they're in another
Hmm.
continent, but I love that you learned that yourself already, and for
Yeah.
the astronaut, I always say, once you start becoming bored of a concept, that's when everyone else is just learning about it. So even you sharing about this part of the brain that, "I've never heard of it," I'm like, "Wow, I've read so much," I'm such
Yeah.
a neuroscience book junkie, and I'm like, "Oh, I'm learning from Kyra here," and, I guarantee you in a year, everyone's going to be talking about that part of the brain, but you've probably known about it forever. So that's a beautiful thing about the astronaut. The another archetype, the
I
opposite
kinda
of the
look like an astronaut today with this headphone thing. I
and
should have
like a
worn
little bit of your
white.
bracelets too. It's very,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Exactly.
The opposite of the astronaut is what's called the neurosurgeon. So it's this idea that this type is really motivated by excellence, detail, diligence. They tend to be quite slow because they want to be perfect at everything, and
Meticulous.
meticulous,
Mm,
overly perfectionistic, um, in its worst form, micromanaging, pedantic, but at its highest form, resilient,
mm.
gritty, because once they have made up their minds, nothing will stop them from reaching their goal. But it feels really different. The astronaut is so bold that they don't even really notice when they're taking a risk. It's only in hindsight when other people say, "Well, how did you do that? How were you so brave?" And the astronaut says, I don't know. I'm just being me. This is just how I am. This is how I'm wired." Versus the neurosurgeon left to their own devices, they will slowly chip away at something. And an example of this is a good friend of mine who looked for an apartment in New York for 10 years. He had the down payment, he had the money to get, but he looked for 10 years until he found the perfect thing. And, he stayed in his apartment for that long. And they're really good at this type of, you know, huge, slow moving, but it's almost like turning turning a cruise ship. It's a huge move, but it has to go really slowly because you're moving something quite large, and what I like to call glass ball projects. So things that you really can't afford to break. There are no
So
take backs on it.
is this your engineering class? Like, is that also an archetype that mostly maps to this way of thinking?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah, very detailed, very diligent. And people think that the neurosurgeon cannot be high AQ, but all these types can be equally high AQ. It's just a matter of pushing the neurosurgeon to let go of their perfectionistic tendencies and to, move 60, even 50, even 40% faster than they normally would. But they also, as I said before, they're fantastic because they stick with something for so long.
Mm.
And that's actually the opposite of the astronaut, where the astronaut can learn a little bit from the neurosurgeon, because they're frequently on to the next thing. But if they just stuck it out a little bit longer, then all the masses would be right behind them.
That's really sage advice. So what are the other 2?
The next one is a novelist, which is what I am. And a novelist, imagine them at their desk mapping out a plot and a story and their characters. Novelists are motivated by the freedom to control and design their own lives. They always have a plan. They love doing research. They need data, they need information, and they want to know everything so that they can prepare intentionally for the future. I'm like that. I have a 5-year plan. I have a 3-month plan. I know my daily plan. I have every bag for every trip I take packed meticulously. And I really, really don't like it when things don't go according to plan. In fact, if a flight gets canceled, or, a client changes their mind about something unexpectedly, it definitely takes me a while to recalibrate to what the new vision is because I spent so much time planning out the old vision. And the novelist is great because they're good at strategy, narrative, storytelling, but what they're not so good at is sort of spontaneous, real-time emergency problem solving, which is becoming more and more a part of all of our lives. So,
Yeah.
flight cancellations, pipe bursts in the house. The final type is called the firefighter, and they're amazing at all of that reactive change that is so hard for the novelist. So a firefighter thrives in chaos. They are motivated by impact. So they love jumping into a chaotic situation where they can immediately add value. You go here, you do this. I got it. Okay, great. But the downside of the firefighter is that they're so good at that last minute real time stuff that they leave the planning to tomorrow that never comes because they think, oh, everything's going to change anyway. Why even bother making a plan? And so you can see how the novelist and the firefighter are opposites and complementary. So if you're a novelist, look for firefighters in your life. And if you're a firefighter, you could really do with a novelist.
So it sounds like there's like this cross, four directions, if you will, and the neurosurgeon and the astronaut are paired up to help each other, complement each other. The novelist and firefighter have kind of a similar relationship where they are balancing each other in their agility, right?
Yes, absolutely,
Okay.
and the connection there is the difference between proactive change, which is a change that we initiate ourselves, like getting healthy, deciding to, take a trip somewhere new, versus reactive change, which is the stuff that happens to us that is often seen less favorably, or less, admiringly than proactive change. And so the astronaut is fast at both proactive and reactive change,
Mm.
whereas the neurosurgeon is slow at both. And then the novelist is good at proactive but not reactive, and then the firefighter is the opposite. So they all exist as, opposites on a matrix.
So I live in the forest, in the mountains and in the creeks and things like that on 170 acres and in Santa Cruz Mountains. And I named from the very first day that I moved there 10 years ago with my husband, I named this land Change. Um, and so it's been both a blessing and a curse, if you will. Not a curse, but just like a reality that this land is teaching me how much things change and how to be in the discipline of change. Yeah. So why don't we go over the C and D as well with agility? Because I want to be able to have a complete teaching from you, for
Absolutely.
our yeah, go ahead.
Yes. So C stands for classroom, and it is the idea that the whole world is designed and exists for us to learn. And that is actually the should be our central focus is not to master everything. Again, not to have that finish line or that arrival, but rather to always be in the process of being a lifelong student. And, my favorite story of this in the corporate world is of Microsoft when Satya Nadella took over as CEO in 2014. Microsoft was really not performing well. Their stock price had been stagnant. They had missed out on big opportunities like mobile and social. And he came in and he said, before I make any big strategic decisions, I need to shift the culture from everyone here wanting to be a know it all to everyone being a learn it all. You don't have to
Mm,
be the best at your job, but you do have to be constantly learning. And that is such a hallmark skill to AQ because I truly do believe this comes from a Buddhist teacher named Pema Chodron, but what she says is that nothing goes away until it teaches us what we need to know.
oh my gosh, that's powerful.
It keeps coming back, and we
Mm-hmm.
keep getting pummeled by the
Mm-hmm.
same unfortunate circumstances over and over again till we glean the lesson. And so we are all here to be students and to be learning and changing all the time. And that's what I think where when something happens, um, for instance, um, I was 1 week postpartum a few weeks ago. My baby's just turning 8 weeks now. And in that
Wow.
period, my brother had a pretty major, mental health crisis, and I just thought,
Mm,
"How can I be 1 week postpartum and also dealing with this sort of really unsurprising issue that struck me over the head?" And the answer was so clear to me when I asked me that question, "What have I not learned? What is this trying to teach me that I need to know?"
mm.
And it was this amazing reminder that I have always had sort of a codependent relationship with my brother. And here I am now, mother to 2 children, and I needed to put down a boundary and prioritize my children who really, really needed me. Otherwise, I would have been the first one on that plane to fix all of his problems. And it was just a reminder. It was like, okay, this is going to keep coming up for you until you actually meaningfully learn the lesson. And I
Mhm.
think that we all have moments that are going to take us down. But if we can actually find the kernel of truth there, then it will not keep returning to us.
20 years ago, I went to see Oprah talk in San Francisco, and she described that as, when the universe is trying to get your attention, it'll whisper, then it'll tap you on the shoulder, then it'll kind of punch you in the arm, and then it will slap you on the face, and then you hit a brick wall, describing her own resistance, and the habenula, just like, nope, I'm going to keep doing plan A. I'm going to keep doing plan A, and the stakes get higher and higher. And so, it seems like having that learning, aspect be such a focus, the classroom being such a focus, that you're not going to get so far down that brick wall, you know, um, continuum, where the suffering just keeps escalating, right? And good on you for really reflecting in that moment, especially postpartum when your brain is mush and you're tired. And having two kids is like having, a 1.5 ratio to the parents, for each kid. So you're automatically outnumbered when you get to have two. It's not like having two, it's having three,
Yes, I
no longer
agree.
man defense. So, what you're describing is such a good priming for people to always remember that, what is this teaching me? That's considered a sacred question in a lot of Native American traditions. What is this teaching me? So that you don't
Beautiful.
get stuck in these patterns. So
Yes,
what is D then?
and D's related to that imagery that you shared of when you went to go see Oprah, this idea of running into a brick wall. D stands for discomfort, and, rightfully so, this is always everyone's least favorite of the 4 skills because even the name discomfort, everyone thinks, "Oh, I don't wanna do
Totally,
that."
totally.
Learning, great, I'd love to do classroom, love to take bets, but this one is harder, but it's this idea that we need to reframe our relationship with discomfort, because generally it's something that we are avoiding at all costs.
Mm.
We are trying to keep things very safe, very happy for ourselves. And not that we should seek out pain, but that to understand that it's not negative, it's actually neutral. It's simply an indicator that you are changing and you are growing. And we know this when we go to the gym. When you get that burn in your muscles, you think, oh, yeah, I really worked out hard yesterday. And so just creating that same association where you're feeling emotional discomfort and you think, oh, well, this is a signal that I am growing my AQ. And this is a really for me, I think this is I reserve this as the last pillar. I mean, it starts with D, so it's the last one, but also it's the most important, because I think it's the hardest for us to do. We naturally want cozy, calm, comfortable, but if you can get really good at being okay in chaos, discomfort, uncertainty, then everything becomes fine. And what I think about is, this person named Alex Honnold, who is, that movie Free Solo is about him. He
Yeah, I
he
couldn't
climbs
watch it.
without
I
any
couldn't
gear.
watch it. I knew he was still alive, so but my brain, I just couldn't bring myself to watch it because my mother genes were like, "No, baby, don't fall." Like I just,
Yes.
ugh, couldn't handle it.
I couldn't watch him. He recently climbed a 101-story building in
I
Taipei, and I couldn't
know.
watch that. It was too stressful.
I
But he
know.
actually has just become such a master of his own discomfort. And I don't actually it would be interesting for you to watch it and explain it to me because I didn't really know the neuroscience behind it, but they did scan his brain, and they could
Yeah,
see that it was operating differently than other people's where,
yeah.
whatever it was, it just, like, wasn't his discomfort
He
level
has
wasn't
he has a
firing the same way.
shrunken he has a shrunken amygdala, which is the
Ah,
area that is fear. So, habenula is this gonna work out for me or not? No, it's negative prediction error. No, it's not gonna work out for me. And then the amygdala is like, I'm scared. So
mm-mm.
when amygdala goes off, it's like, I'm scared. And then habenula is like, all right, this isn't gonna work for us because you're scared and like I'm gonna protect us and just stop this right now, full stop. So that stopping thing doesn't happen for him because he doesn't
Yes.
have that amygdala that's like, help me, kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think what people have speculated is not that he was born with a shrunken amygdala, but that it just happened over time of him putting himself
Probably.
in these situations. And I really see this with the CEOs who I work with, where the things that would completely undo them when they first started, huge PR crisis, someone suing them. A few years later, you're like, someone's suing me.
Oh,
And
I bet everybody's wanting that state. Everybody's like, "Oh," but you got just like working out muscles, you gotta work on it to get there, right? You gotta my second favorite word is hormesis. So
ooh,
hormesis is the word for when you the strength that comes through challenge.
Uh,
It's the post-traumatic growth, AKA. So I think that, like you're talking about, that the growing of that muscle, the growing of that, courage over and over again, because, you're kind of little by little building that strength, building that capacity to not freak out in the face of discomfort.
yes.
And I think that's such a powerful thing, that everything against our society, this is a salmon run, because everything in our society is making us squishy and weak and small. And in the meantime, what we talked about, AI was born of iteration, life-threatening iteration. Those bots that did not iterate were killed off. We don't have them with us today. So the species that has been generated from that initial work with AI is incredibly iterative. And so we're going to need to match that and surpass that, because we still have, sensations. We still have senses. We still have emotions. And we shouldn't be ashamed of that as a species. In fact, that is our advantage. That will always be our advantage, is our ability to emote, our ability to intuit, our ability to relate and connect and love, all these things that, don't be afraid of these technologies that are coming, lean into our own strengths, our own discomfort, our own fears, and take bets and learn something, and, anchor ourselves, and also, deal with the disruption, deal with the trouble that we think is going to happen when we face our greatest fears.
And I think what you bring up is really valuable, this idea that our society is making us squishy because it's true. We live in, not we spend 97% of our day in temperature controlled environments, whether it's the car or the house, and that was never the case. And
Yeah.
so what I want to remind people is that um this is our birthright. We were all born to be high AQ people. It's not some mountain that we have to climb to recover some part of us that never existed. It's actually just a reconnection with how we were always supposed to be. Our forefathers as hunter gatherers, they didn't even know where they were going to be the next day. They were trying out different berries and different plants. They weren't sure how that was going to go. And so we actually, by nature, and even if you look at little children, they're the most high AQ people, they're constantly putting themselves in the unknown, uncertainty, discomfort. And what I want to articulate here, if everyone leaves with just one message, is that none of this is impossible. In fact, it's just a return to self. It's a
Mm,
return to who you are and what's available to you. That's what AQ
mhm.
is for everyone.
Yeah, and nature. Because if you look at
Mhm.
nature, DNA, RNA, viruses, bacteria are constantly mutating, where they're constantly adapting, like you said with the penguins. Like there's constant adaptation in nature. And, again, one mechanism that we talked about earlier is this habenula switch of, like, stop doing that and start iterating. And let's land on motherhood, because you just had your second child. I'm amazed that you're doing this interview this close to that. Thank you so much. I had no idea. I would not have, maybe tromped on that, but I hope that this feeds you as a mother to have had this conversation and to share your knowledge here. Um, how has that changed you? Because the hormones coming from parenting, I don't care if you're a woman or man, but women have it, stronger, from oxytocin, from belonging, from a sense of connection, also a sense of exhaustion. But what is that doing to your being in combination with all of that, and all of this wisdom that you carry?
The idea of AQ in the book itself was actually birthed in that very fragile postpartum period. I started writing the book when I was 2 months postpartum with my first daughter in 2024, and at the time, I just turned 40, and I was having my first child after 2 decades of having a very selfish existence.
Mm.
and everything changed for me, and I had the idea previously, but I intentionally chose to write it in that, very amorphous, ambiguous time period because I thought, "There's any time to write a book about change and being agile, it's now."
Yeah.
And she has been my greatest teacher because when all the hormones were going crazy, my identity was shifting, my, what was important to me was moving around, it was just, a moving target, I wasn't even sure about who I was anymore. I would still get these flashes of inspiration late at night when I was feeding her. You're up 3 times in the middle of the night, and it's just so quiet because no one else is awake. I didn't wanna look at my phone, I was just with her, but I had all these ideas for the book come to mind, and it was almost as if this was exactly the moment I should be writing it, but it's completely changed me, and it's also told me that I cannot plan anything. As a novelist archetype, I would love for her to be on a schedule and to think, I'm always on Reddit going, "Okay, how many weeks until breastfeeding gets easier? How many weeks until they're sleeping through the night?" And the answer is no one can tell you, and
Mm.
I hate that answer, but I'm
Yeah,
learning to become more of a firefighter, more of an astronaut, because to be with my children is to be in the flow of the unknown, and motherhood has been the greatest gift. I think I've been completely transformed by it. And my husband, who's a firefighter, the opposite is true for him, where he's had to learn how to be a lot more planful. He can't just fly by the seat of his pants. You gotta bring diapers sometimes, right? You have to be prepared. So I think that, it's this big revealer, um, of all the places that where we feel uncomfortable, and then, if you're willing to meet the challenge, it can also be something that grows you so much.
that's beautiful. Let's end there. That's an ode to Mother Nature and parenting for everybody and being parented. How beautiful it is to be human. Thank you so much for showing us all of the instructions that we need for this modern life. Thanks, Liz Tran.
Thank you, Kyra.